Hey there, viewers. Let me ask you this. What would push someone to their breaking point in front of the entire world? Drop your thoughts in the comments because Diddy just had a full-blown meltdown in the courtroom after the judge revealed shocking new details about his case. And trust me, what went down is something no one saw coming. Stay locked in. This is one story you can't afford to miss. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The file that changed everything. The walls of MDC were thick with desperation. It seeped into the air, into the walls, into every breath a person took inside this place. I had been inside many correctional facilities before, representing clients from all walks of life, but MDC Brooklyn had a different kind of weight to it. It wasn't just the overcrowding or the constant hum of tension vibrating through the halls. It was the kind of place that seemed to break people down to their most primal selves. The guards walked with sharp, trained eyes, their hands never straying too far from their batons. Inmates sat hunched over metal tables, some whispering in hushed tones, others staring blankly at the walls like they had lost all concept of time. I had seen it all before, or at least I thought I had, because nothing prepared me for what I was about to discover. The MDC attorney room, a normal day, or so I thought. The attorney meeting rooms at MDC were about as welcoming as a graveyard at midnight. Flickering fluorescent lights, rusted metal chairs, a desk covered in papers that smelled like old ink and institutional coffee. I had been in this room dozens of times before, going through motions with clients, fighting for plea deals, making sure my clients got their so-called fair trial. But today felt different. I dropped my briefcase onto the desk and pulled out the stack of case files I had to review before the next hearing. I had a system. Start with the easiest ones first, then move on to the real nightmares. But before I could even begin, a thick manila folder caught my attention. It wasn't placed neatly with the others. No, this one was set aside, as if someone had deliberately pulled it out, as if it was waiting for me. And on the tab, written in bold black ink, was a name I had grown far too familiar with over the years: Sean Combs. I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine as I reached for it. My fingers hesitated just for a second, and I didn't know why. I had seen this case before. So why did it feel different this time? I opened the file, and what I saw inside made my blood turn to ice. The file that shouldn't exist. At first glance, it looked like any other high-profile criminal case. Pages upon pages of charges, witness statements, and sealed documents. But as my eyes scanned the contents, something felt off. There were documents in here that I should not be seeing. Not just legal accusations or trial notes, but things that weren't meant for me, things that weren't meant for anyone. Classified memos, sealed testimonies, medical evaluations, psychological assessments that painted a picture I couldn't begin to comprehend. And then the pictures. I sucked in a breath. I had defended murderers, drug lords, crime bosses, but I had never seen anything like this. I flipped the page, my pulse hammering in my ears. A grainy surveillance photo, timestamped 2:37 a.m., showed Diddy inside his cell. But something about it wasn't right. His posture, his expression, the way he was staring directly at the camera as if he knew someone was watching. My hands trembled as I turned to the next document. An interview transcript between an unknown official and one of the prison guards. Interviewer: have you noticed anything unusual about inmate Combs? Guard: every damn day. Interviewer: what do you mean by that? Guard: he don't act like he's in prison. He don't act like a man who's facing life. It's like he knows something the rest of us don't. Like, he ain't worried at all. I swallowed hard. I flipped again, and that's when I saw it. A sealed document labeled, "For authorized eyes only." I wasn't authorized, but I had already gone too far. I peeled the paperclip off and unfolded the document. And then, in an instant, everything changed. A secret buried in the paperwork. What I read didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I skimmed the first few lines, my breath catching in my throat. It was a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. But not just any evaluation. This one was different. Diddy had been tested, psychologically, physically, medically, and the results made my stomach turn. Subject exhibits traits consistent with manipulative psychopathy, displays zero remorse, consistently refers to himself in the third person, appears to believe he is untouchable. I clenched my jaw. This was nothing new. I had met plenty of narcissists before. Hell, half of Hollywood was full of them. But this file wasn't just calling Diddy a narcissist. It was calling him something else. I flipped to the next page, and that's when I saw the list. A list of names. Some crossed out, some still intact. Some I recognized. All people who had gone missing. I gripped the file so hard my knuckles turned white. A shiver ran down my spine. What the hell was I looking at? I didn't have time to process it because at that moment, my phone rang. The call that changed everything. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. I jolted in my seat, my pulse skyrocketing. Who the hell was calling me right now? I reached into my pocket, my hands unsteady, and pulled out my phone. The screen was blank. No caller ID, just unknown number. My throat went dry. I hesitated. Then slowly, I pressed the answer button and lifted the phone to my ear. For a few seconds, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice. Deep, heavy, almost unnatural. You know what to do. I froze. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, the line went dead. The air in the room felt suffocating. My hands were clammy. My entire body was frozen. I looked back at the file on the desk, and for the first time since I became a lawyer, I felt genuine fear. Because whatever I had just uncovered, I wasn't supposed to see it. And now? Now I had no idea if I was ever going to make it out of this alive. Chapter 2. The case I couldn't escape. I sat there, staring at the open file on my desk, my hands trembling as if my body had turned against me. The words, the images, the classified reports. I couldn't even process them. It was horrific, beyond horrific. I had seen my fair share of criminal records, autopsy reports, gruesome case files that would make the average person lose sleep for weeks. But this was something else. This wasn't just a legal case. It was something darker, something I shouldn't be involved in. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. I needed to get out. I couldn't handle this case. I wouldn't. I had represented some of the most infamous figures in the entertainment industry. Rappers, actors, executives, gangsters. Some were guilty, some weren't. But at the end of the day, my job wasn't to judge them. It was to defend them. But this case wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about something else entirely. Something that made my stomach churn. I slammed the file shut. I had to get out. The decision to walk away. I took a deep breath and pushed my chair back. I needed to leave this room. I needed to tell the firm, hell, tell the judge, that I was recusing myself from this case. I didn't care what it would do to my reputation. No amount of money was worth this. I grabbed the file and shoved it into my briefcase, but my hands were shaking so much that I fumbled with the lock. I closed my eyes, took another deep breath. I just needed to get out of this room. Then, a noise. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. I snapped my head up. The office was empty. But something felt wrong. I could feel it. That unnatural stillness in the air. The kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned my gaze toward the door. It was shut. Locked. Like it always was. But then why? Why did it feel like someone was standing right outside of it? I swallowed hard. My breathing had become shallow. I hadn't even noticed. I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt weak, like I had been sitting in this chair for hours without moving. I walked toward the door, my fingers hovering over the handle. Then, a knock. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. My heart stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Who the hell was knocking on my door at this hour? I cleared my throat, trying to push down the fear that was creeping into my voice. "Who is it?" I asked. Silence. I felt my pulse in my ears, hammering like a war drum. I reached for the handle and, with a deep breath, unlocked the door. I pulled it open, and no one was there. The call that stopped me. Cold. I exhaled sharply, stepping back into the office, my mind racing. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe this case had already started to mess with my head. I turned back toward my desk. And then my phone rang. Unknown number. I froze. My hand hovered over the phone, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to answer it. But I did. I lifted it to my ear, hesitating. Then, that same deep, heavy voice from before. "You're making a mistake." My entire body locked up. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I tried to steady my breath, tried to act like I wasn't terrified. "Who is this?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. No answer. Just the sound of breathing. Deep, slow, deliberate. Then, "We need you on this case." I gripped the phone tighter. I felt sweat start to bead at my temples. "I'm not taking this case," I said, my voice firmer this time. Silence. Then, "You don't have a choice." Click. The line went dead. The horror that followed. I sat there staring at my phone. I felt like I had just been hit with a sledgehammer to the chest. My breathing was ragged. My thoughts were spiraling. This wasn't just intimidation. This was a warning, a threat. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let me walk away. And that's when it happened. The lights flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely. I was plunged into complete darkness. For a second, I thought it was just the office, maybe a bad bulb or faulty wiring. But then I looked outside the window. The entire 1600 was dark. No lights in the hallways, no security monitors flashing, nothing, just complete blackness. I felt my stomach drop. Something was very, very wrong. I heard a faint click. My office door. It had just unlocked. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming from the hallway. Now my chest tightened. I wasn't alone. I reached into my briefcase, scrambling for anything to defend myself with. And then, just as suddenly as the darkness came, the lights flickered back on. I whipped my head toward the door. It was still shut, but now, sitting on my desk, was a single piece of paper. I hadn't put it there. I knew I hadn't put it there. My hands trembled as I reached for it, unfolding it with shaky fingers. One sentence, scrawled in rough, jagged ink. "Show up to court. Do your job." I dropped the paper like it had burned me. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to get out. I didn't care how powerful this client was. I didn't care how much money was on the line. I wasn't handling this case. I reached for my phone, ready to call the firm, ready to tell them I was out. But before I could dial, my phone buzzed again. Another message. No number, no sender. Just one word. Run. Chapter 3. The only way out. I had no choice, no escape. I tried to walk away, tried to back out, but they wouldn't let me. Whoever was behind this, whoever had sent those messages, made that call, left that paper on my desk, they wanted me in court. Not to defend Diddy, not to get him acquitted. They wanted me to control the narrative. But I knew the truth now. I had read the file, the horrific details, the crimes, the things that no one in the courtroom knew. The world still saw Sean Combs as a music mogul, an entertainment icon, a businessman who had built an empire from the ground up. But I had seen the real Sean Combs, the blackmail, the cover-ups, the disappearances, the things that didn't make the headlines. And now, after everything, after the threats, after the warnings, I had only one way out. I had to tell the truth. I had to expose everything, even if it meant I wouldn't walk out of that courtroom alive. The decision. I sat in my office at 1600, my hands pressed together, my breathing unsteady. Tomorrow was the hearing. Diddy would be sitting right there in front of me. The judge, the jury, the entire courtroom. And I was going to stand up and say everything. Every black work. Every dark truth. But my chest was tight. I wasn't just scared. I was terrified. This wasn't just a high-profile case. This was something bigger. I had defended killers before. I had walked criminals free. But this was different. Because it wasn't just about what Diddy had done. It was about who was protecting him. Who was making sure he never got caught. The politicians, the law enforcement officials, the business executives. They weren't just turning a blind eye. They were in on it. And I was about to destroy all of it, if I lived long enough to do it. The final warning. I was deep in thought, running through everything I was about to say in court, when my phone buzzed. Not an unknown number this time. Not a text, a video. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I clicked it. The video opened, and my blood ran cold. It was me. Footage of me in my office, sitting right at this desk. The angle was from above, like it had been recorded from a hidden camera in the ceiling. Someone was watching me. I clicked out of the video, my breathing shaky. A message popped up immediately after. Don't make a mistake. My stomach clenched. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a final warning. The ride to court. The next morning, I barely slept. I left MDC early, escorted by security. But I knew security wouldn't help me. I stepped into the black car waiting for me outside the facility. The ride to the courthouse was silent. Every streetlight, every passing car, every shadow. I felt like I was being watched from all angles. Maybe I was. Maybe this was the last time I'd ever sit in a car like this, driving through the city. I clenched my fists. I wasn't backing down. Not now. If they wanted to silence me, they were going to have to do it in front of the entire world. Inside the courtroom, the courthouse was packed. Journalists, cameras, spectators. The air was electric. Everyone knew this case was bigger than what was being said. I walked past the media frenzy, past the flashing cameras, past the reporters shouting my name. Then I stepped inside the courtroom. And there he was, Sean Combs, Diddy, sitting at the defense table like he owned the place. Even in a suit, even in chains, he still had that look, that smirk, that aura, that power. Like none of this mattered, like he was still in control. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I took my seat, and I waited for my moment. The moment of truth. The judge entered. The courtroom stood. Then the hearing began. For the first half, it was standard procedure. The prosecution laid out its claims. The defense team, Diddy's real legal team, not me, tried to poke holes in the case. But then, the judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter," he said, addressing me by name. I stood up slowly. This was it. I cleared my throat, and I started speaking. I took this case under the impression that my client was innocent, I began. I turned toward Diddy. He was staring at me, his expression unreadable. But after reviewing the evidence, I can no longer stay silent. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. I took a deep breath. There are things this court has not yet seen. Things that go beyond what has been presented today. Diddy's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. I was about to expose him. I turned toward the judge. I have proof of activities that... Then something happened. Something I never expected. Diddy started laughing. A low, quiet chuckle at first. Then it grew louder. Louder. Until the entire courtroom was staring at him. I froze. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order in the court." Diddy leaned back in his chair, smirking. He wasn't scared. He wasn't worried. He wasn't even trying to defend himself. Then he spoke. "You really think they're going to let you finish that sentence?" I felt a chill run through my spine. I turned toward the judge. And that's when I saw it. His face. The judge wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding silence from Diddy. He was just staring at me. Like he was waiting for something to happen. Like he already knew what was coming next. My stomach twisted. Something was very, very wrong. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, barely glancing at the screen. One message. "Check the news." My hand shook as I tapped open my browser. The headlines hit me like a truck. Breaking. Lawyer for Sean Combs. Involved in tragic car accident. Presumed dead. I blinked. My heart nearly stopped. I read the headline again. Then I read it a third time. They had already written my obituary. I slowly turned back toward Diddy. He was still grinning, like he had already won. And at that moment, I realized something. I wasn't walking out of this courtroom alive. Chapter 4. The Day of Truth. I woke up feeling like I was walking to my own execution. Today was the day. The day I would stand before the court, look the judge in the eye, and expose everything. I had spent the entire night preparing, going over the details again and again in my head. I had rehearsed my words. I had convinced myself that there was no turning back. But no matter how many times I told myself I was ready, I wasn't. Because I wasn't afraid of the judge. I wasn't afraid of the jury. I wasn't even afraid of the media, the headlines, or the threats. I was afraid of him, Diddy, the man sitting just feet away from me, watching, waiting, smirking, arriving at the courtroom. The courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the hallways, cameras flashing, voices shouting, journalists scrambling for any last-minute leaks. The public was restless. Everyone knew this was the biggest hearing yet. The moment where the case would take a turn, and I was the one turning it. I walked through the crowd, ignoring the questions being thrown at me. "Mr. Carter, will you be standing by Diddy's side today? Are the rumors true that you're about to switch sides? Do you fear for your safety?" That last one made my stomach tighten. Yes, I feared for my safety. But I had made my choice. I was going to tell the truth, inside the courtroom. As I stepped inside, the weight of the room hit me. The tension was suffocating. The gallery was filled with reporters, victims' families, and high-profile individuals. Some who wanted justice, others who wanted Diddy free. The judge sat in his usual place, emotionless, tapping his gavel for silence. And then, the door at the back opened. The guards let him in. Sean Diddy Combs. He walked in slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. He was wearing a dark suit, freshly pressed. His face was calm. Too calm. He scanned the room, his eyes moving across the crowd, the judge, the jury. And then he looked at me. I felt my breath catch. His stare wasn't angry. It wasn't panicked. It was just calculated. Like he already knew exactly what was going to happen today. He took his seat, folded his hands, waited. And I realized something. I was the only person in this room who didn't feel like they were in on the secret. Starting the testimony. The judge cleared his throat. "Proceed." I stood up. My heart pounded against my ribs as I walked toward the center of the room. All eyes were on me. I swallowed hard. And then, I started. "Your Honor, I took this case believing my client was innocent. I reviewed the evidence, examined the reports, and I believed that there was a chance to fight for him." I turned slightly, my gaze landing on Diddy. But I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order," I continued. "The crimes committed by Sean Combs are not just what's been presented in this court. There is more, much more." I paused, scanning the faces of the jury. There are victims who have never been heard. There are crimes that have been covered up. There are people, powerful people, who have made sure that none of this ever came to light. Diddy didn't react. Not a twitch, not a frown, just that same knowing look. The judge's face was unreadable, but I kept going. "I have evidence that ties my client to activities beyond what has been discussed in this courtroom." I reached into my bag and pulled out the file. The real one. The one that hadn't been submitted into evidence. The one that they had tried to make disappear. The prosecution lawyers turned their heads sharply. The defense team looked stiff. Diddy still didn't move. But I saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes. A shift. A warning. I knew what this meant. I was crossing a line. But I couldn't stop now. The moment, everything changed. I stepped forward and placed the file onto the table. I have documents, witness statements, and financial transactions that tie Sean Combs to... Crack! A loud noise echoed through the courtroom. I froze. The judge narrowed his eyes. "What was that?" No one spoke. I turned slightly, looking toward the back of the room. The sound had come from outside the courtroom doors. Something felt wrong. The judge motioned for the bailiff to check. The man walked toward the doors. Slowly. He opened them, and then immediately stumbled back. A man in a black suit walked in. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't with the press. And something in my gut told me he wasn't supposed to be here. He didn't say a word, just walked forward. 2 more men followed behind him, straight toward the judge. straight toward me. My blood ran cold. The judge's face remained calm, like he had been expecting them. I turned toward Diddy. For the first time all morning, he smiled, and then he leaned forward slightly. "You think you can win this?" My throat went dry. I was wrong. This wasn't my moment to speak the truth. It was their moment to silence me. The men in suits reached the judge's bench. The judge leaned in, listened, nodded. Then he turned his gaze toward me. "Mr. Carter," he said. I held my breath. "The court is in recess." "Recess?" The judge stood up. The jury was dismissed. The bailiffs began escorting people out. The courtroom was being emptied. I turned back to Diddy. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and gave me one last glance. Then he turned and walked away, his guards following behind him. And just like that, the hearing was over. I had prepared for today for weeks. I had gathered evidence, risked my life to bring the truth forward. And now, they weren't even letting me speak. I was supposed to expose him. But somehow, he had shut it all down. And the worst part, I didn't even know how he did it. I stood there, frozen, stunned, speechless. I had never felt so powerless. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't been fighting against one man. I had been fighting against an entire system. And now, I didn't know if I would even make it to the next hearing alive. I sat in my office, staring at the walls. It had been 2 days since the hearing. 2 days since I stood in that courtroom, ready to expose everything, only to be shut down before I could even finish my statement. 2 days since I had seen those men in suits whisper to the judge, since I had watched Diddy walk away like he already knew the outcome before it even happened. I had been preparing to fight a legal battle, but this wasn't about the law anymore. It never was. This was about power, and Diddy had it, more than I ever realized. The case that no longer existed. The morning after the hearing, I had tried to reach out to the prosecution. No response. I had tried to reschedule a meeting with the judge. His secretary told me he was no longer available. And when I went to check the court files, Diddy's case was gone. Not dismissed, not transferred, just gone. As if it had never existed in the first place. That's when the panic started to creep in. That's when I knew I wasn't just outplayed, I was erased. I tried calling the one journalist who had been covering this case with real intensity. I dialed her number, hoping for some kind of answer, some kind of clarity. But the line was dead. I tried another journalist. Voicemail. Another. Voicemail. I turned on the TV, switched to the news. They were covering everything else. Politics, celebrity drama, financial markets. But not a single word about Diddy. It was like the entire case had never even happened. A call I didn't want to answer. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was from rage or fear. Maybe both. And then, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, staring at the screen. Something in my gut told me this wasn't a call I wanted to take, but I answered anyway. "Hello?" For a second, silence, and then a voice. Deep, cold, familiar. "You're a smart man," he said. "Diddy?" I gripped the phone tighter. He let out a slow chuckle. "You really thought you could win?" I swallowed hard. "What did you do?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He laughed again. "I did what I always do," he said. "I handled it." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "You can't just make a case disappear," I said. "Can I?" His voice was smooth, effortless, like this was just another business deal. I closed my eyes. You think the courts control anything? He continued. You think the law is real? He paused. The only thing that's real is power. And I have more than you could ever understand. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. But he wasn't, because I had seen it with my own eyes. I had watched a public, high-profile case vanish into thin air. I had watched the judge, and one of the most respected in the system, bow down without a fight. Diddy was still in MDC. But I was starting to wonder, was he even really a prisoner? The final message. I took a deep breath. So what now? I asked. Another pause. Then, in a voice so low, it barely even sounded like a threat. You walk away. I clenched my jaw. You think I'll just let this go? I said. Diddy exhaled. Listen, he said, almost like he was bored. You tried. You lost. Now move on before you lose more than just a case. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. I could still hear his voice in my head. You walk away. And the terrifying part? I didn't even have a choice. The case that never was. The next morning, I went back to the courthouse. I had to see for myself. I walked through the halls searching for anyone who would acknowledge what had happened 2 days ago. But every clerk, every officer acted like they had no idea what I was talking about. Diddy's hearing? I asked one of the clerks at the records desk. She blinked at me. There was no hearing for Sean Combs, she said. My stomach turned. I was there, I said firmly. I was standing in that courtroom. She frowned. I think you're mistaken, sir. I exhaled sharply. I knew what this was. I wasn't crazy. They were gaslighting me, wiping it all away. The evidence, the files, the media coverage, the witnesses, everything. It was like the case never existed. And if I kept pushing, soon I wouldn't exist either. The end of the battle. By the end of the week, I had packed my bags. I had quit the case, quit everything. I didn't make a public statement. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just disappeared, because the truth was clear now. Diddy had won. And not just this trial, not just this moment. He had won the whole damn system. And I knew no one would ever stop him.